Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride It Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
All right. Happy Monday, everybody. This is a special one. We don't often get Sunil Yu with us. Not only is Sunil joining us, but I'm actually in the same facility as Sunil going on right now. He wouldn't let me hang out with him in his room. He's on the the elite floors, and as Chris we were talking about, I think I'm in the first time I'm in the base. You just typically don't go into the 1A and 1B.
In most U.S. hotels, they don't have a 13th floor, so maybe Andrew's on the 13th floor.
Very possible. That's where I would put him if I was the hotel.
But no, we're here in Tampa at the Cyber Bay event. This is an event kicking off the Bellini College of AI, Computing, and Cyber, and bringing together academia, national defense, business, and government. And we have close to 1,200 people registered for this event. Sunil is our keynote speaker. John Strand's doing a 6-hour training course right now with 120 people, and I put a picture of it out there for you all to see. It's a really exciting day. Before we get into today's topic, we'll do a touch of banter. Before I talk to that banter regarding Phyllis and CIS, I don't know. I thought, Chris, you had frozen for a minute, but you haven't. You're just very intent. Either maybe you had a lot of caffeine first thing. But so Chris, this ruse continues of that kind of started with M365, right?
Right.
The evil jinx, adversary in the middle attacks that have now week after week we kind of talk about one of these, but this now has morphed into one where they're stealing, your token in the middle, and this one's payroll pirate, and they're redirecting users to log in and then taking over their accounts and redirecting, obviously, where those funds go via work. This is a Workday. So this is an enterprise based attack or SaaS enterprise attack. And they do a really nice job here outlining this, the ruse. What I would want to ask you, Chris, is, if this is being done, routinely now at the enterprise, right? We saw the Salesforce sales off drift. Now we're seeing it in Workday. What does this tell you? Do you feel this will come outside of M365 into maybe other mainstream apps that we see SMBs using that MSPs support? Like, we haven't seen any QuickBooks thus far, but could they be far behind if we're seeing this type of attack so widely and pervasive? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are we've been seeing these kind of in bits and pieces for a while now. So I remember a couple of years ago we saw a series of attacks where, when an employee is first able to sign on to a payroll system, they're kind of given a default set of credentials. Mm-hmm. And the threat actors figured out what those default sets of credentials were. So they were able to kind of guess at which employees hadn't enrolled yet. So the threat actors just enrolled themselves and did the same thing. Now, in that particular case, they were diverting like health savings account type funds, and that's where they're able to steal. But this payroll stuff and getting people to fall into a trap where the threat actor is able to redirect their payroll to a different account has been going on for a long time. But now the threat actors are just looking for, bigger scores. And here's another example of kind of a one-to-many type situation where they can get money pretty darn quickly and probably get that money out the door and in their pockets pretty quickly when they go after these platforms. So you're exactly right. And I will say that the platforms that will probably suffer the least will be the ones that have some type of fraud mechanisms in place, and they're kind of running and looking for types of stuff. I think when we see these platforms that are compromised, that have a lot of successful attacks, I think that kind of goes to show a lack of security, especially fraud detection on their part.
So Neil, your specialty obviously with Gnostic is AI, data governance, and is this how much of this is just lack of governance and obviously this is a lot of security awareness training, but what role do you feel just culture and governance plays on just leadership not taking a stronger and active role and really getting involved? It seems like security awareness training is about the end user, like, hey, you're the one that's doing this wrong. Can you give us your take on that?
Sure. And I think actually even the answer was provided in that article that Chris was showing, which is not all MFAs created equal. We have MFA that is susceptible to phishing, and we have MFA that is just simply not. So in the context of taking the problem out of the user's hands, if I can take it out of the user's hands, there's no need for security awareness training around, hey, watch out for this type of attack, because we're just immune to that. I think the question I would actually throw back to you all is, what holds us back from actually implementing phishing-resistant MFA? I have this little thing in my computer, and aside from the cost of this, and so there's constraints. The cost of this plus the distribution challenges of this. But then there are other mechanisms that don't rely that aren't as strong as this, but are still nonetheless more or less phishing resistant. And so I think the challenge is really for us to figure out, how do we make those phishing resistant MFA become much more prevalent, much easier to implement, much more widespread? Because at the end of the day, if we're relying upon a human to make the right decisions, we will have some percentage of people who will make the wrong decisions, and will continue to incentivize attackers to exploit that because it will still work. But once we have these sort of things more widespread, the attackers will go find something else to do, hopefully.
Phyllis, so Sunil brings up a great point. So let's talk controls. The latest research shows and stats show 39% efficacy of MFA. So Sunil brings up, this great point. Let's get people to phishing resistance. We can't get people to click a button and just turn on MFA. What, in all the conversations and interviews, whether it's an enterprise, whether it's a state agency or an SMB come to you and say, Phyllis, help me with the controls. What do you think is the problem where we can't even get regular MFA above 50%?
Right. We always strongly recommend MFA, and, it's different things. I think I've said on here before, when I talk about K-12, not everyone has a phone. Some of it is like the economics of it. Some of it is policy, right? Sometimes people write policy that doesn't help themselves. But honestly, in today's day and age, outside of like K-12, I think, there's no reason to not use MFA. And so, time and time again, we find organizations that don't use MFA. And, when we talk with them about it, it really is just, I think people are just resistant to change, or maybe they don't understand, or it's just like, it's a hassle. Right?
Yeah.
So security can be a hassle, right? And it's always that balance between usability and security. But honestly, I push back on that, because of course you're going to have MFA on your banking, right? Like, if you exist today and you don't have MFA with your banking, your online banking, then that's ridiculous, right? And so, we seem to have these different thresholds. At work, I expect to not be bothered ever, because I don't know why, but like in my personal life, of course, I want to protect my money.
Right.
I want to protect my children's, identities and my medical information and things like that. So, it really is that culture of security at work? I know it's kind of like soft and squishy, and we talk about we have to have a culture of security, but it does have to feel like everyone has a role and everyone has to play their part, and it's okay to allow to add one extra step to a user's day every time they have to access something. We just have to get past that.
Yeah. Okay.
And we don't see it, in my opinion, we don't see it change generationally, right? You would think that, people would become more willing to adopt stronger forms of security, just as a part of being technology being a part of their lives. But you don't see it. I mean, the younger people don't see it just as much of an impediment as the older folks do.
I mean, I think they want that like instant gratification. I mean, honestly, years ago I went to a conference and there were some providers on there, and they were like, look, if someone takes a photo of food and that photo doesn't appear on their social media within milliseconds, then they're getting like complaints. That, oh, this isn't, what's going on? Why can't I, put this up to my feed? And so, I mean, that speaks to what Chris is saying about this younger generation of they need it now. It's like this quickly. And so, maybe MFA is that barrier of, oh, one more thing to do.
Neil, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think ultimately we want more of these systems to be just integrated with how we interact with systems. So I'm using a Mac, and Touch ID is how I get into my Mac most of the time. And on my Windows machine, it's Windows Hello, where I just stare at the computer and it logs me in. So in many regards, this is these barriers that we had previously are largely going away because the function of authentication is now being, or of both passwordless and multi-factor authentication is being integrated into these biometric-based MFA is being integrated into the computing platforms themselves. I absolutely recognize that there are not everyone has computers that are compatible with those sort of forms of authentication. But that's again why I think we also have these tokens that you can issue. Again, I understand that there are hindrances to being able to deploy this broadly, and I think the broader challenge that we as an industry should think through is what lowers those. Not the barrier in terms of the usage, because I think we have models for how people can interact with these systems, but the barrier to adopting those technologies either inside the enterprise or inside of whatever organization you might be in.
Question for you, Bob. I got this is just you would get in trouble at a company if you let somebody physically into the building and let them steal something. Hey, I know this person's bad, but I'm going to let you in and take something, and you might lose your job. You might receive some type of, I don't know, write up, whatever.
There's obviously a ramification. That's right.
There's a ramification. Is there going to be some point where maybe letting bad guys in, there's ramifications for that, or is it not going to be that way? What are your thoughts? I mean,
well, we've all talked about this. I mean, Phyllis, everybody has on this call more times than not. I think the only way that we're ever going to get any real movement out of this is when it's a requirement to keep your cyber insurance, or it's something that impacts your revenue stream. That's the only time that people are really going to start paying attention to this. And we could talk all day about how to, the needs to implement this correctly, because Sunil's right. You can do it, but people would have to change all of their, a lot of them are using legacy protocols for authentication. You got to change all that out. And there'd be a lot of heavy lifting to do, but I think the only way you get people to bite down on that is to make the ramifications be, we're not going to pay your claim if you have behaved in this manner, which is to not bring your systems up to a standard that we feel like you can. And I think that's going to happen. I think it's just a matter of time. I think that the requirements in 2 years are going to be a great deal different than they are right now as it relates to, insurance companies paying claims on these things. I don't know any other way to do it, since we're kind of losing the regulatory energy that we had trying to force this issue too, right?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, Eric, you're right. Eric mentions the financial ramification. I mean, that's what, if you think about it, cyber insurance drove more security controls than regulation ever did, right? I mean,
yeah. And Marsh, the insurance broker Marsh, has this study that was done by Scott Stransky, and you might be able to find his presentation somewhere. But if I recall, he identified 5 key controls that moved the needle the most in terms of reducing the number of breaches. And so, from the standpoint of how insurance providers price insurance, I would think that they would say, okay, hey, if you have these 5 controls implemented, then your insurance premium goes down, right? The first one was hardening, if I recall, but the second one was loosely interpreted. You could say it's tied to MFA. So bottom line is that you could argue that if you don't have good if you don't have good authentication, especially for privileged accounts, then you get dinged pretty badly because it's the second most important factor.
Interesting. Though it sounds a lot like a community defense model, and that maybe one day cyber insurance will care what you guys have to say. But let's talk CIS just for 2 minutes, and then we'll get into today. Obviously, big news. Funding's fallen off for from CISA to CIS. That means probably impacts, and how it's going to impact MSISAC and your SOC and. What do what are your thoughts here? What should we know? And
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So, the MSI stack still exists in June in anticipation of funding because, the CIS lost around $10 million in funding around February, March timeframe. DOJ announced that. And so, we kind of saw the writing on the wall. We were hopeful that the government would fund the MSISAC. However, in anticipation of that, we did roll out a membership model. And that's actually been doing pretty well. So, depending on your size, whether you're state, local, tribal, territorial government, depends on how much you pay. There's a whole of state model where the state could pay for everyone within the state, and then it goes from there. And that actually has been doing really well. So, those organizations that have signed up, thank you. You're helping fund and keep the MSISAC. And since the funding has been cut, we're going to have to, gradually, roll people off of the ISAC services. However, we have been really trying to make sure that there's some continuity for the states, because we still, of course, believe in state cybersecurity, and we want to provide as many services as possible in as cost-efficient a way as possible.
Got it. Well, when you have money like Chris Lair, I think he could probably bail out of the Southeast at least.
Oh, wait, you're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute. You can't hear me.
But
I gotta write me a good book like this one.
There you go.
I can make lots of money.
Yeah. Well, as they say, you don't make money off of the books. You make money off of the books being a calling card.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Like keynote speaking, right, Sunil? That's why you're here, right? All right, let's get on into it. So, this. Sunil, you and I are going back and forth. AI, obviously incredible background in cyber. I'll let you introduce yourself momentarily, but you were talking about organizations not being ready operationally. And so I was like, wow, that's, you always come up with fascinating topics. As I let you introduce yourself and hand this over to Phyllis, have you had any inspiration from the Cyber Defense Matrix on this topic? Like, hey, this is a way to get people, organizations better operationally mature by using the Matrix. Because as you said, it's a mental model, and maybe you can talk about that in the intro. Has the model been used at all in AI, and have you seen some interesting use cases for that?
Sure. So as Chris kind of mentioned, the Cyber Defense Matrix is a mental model that I created. And just for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a 5x5 matrix that has 5 things that we care about: devices, applications, networks, data, and users, and then 5 functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework, creating this nice bingo card. But what's most interesting, actually, of late has been what's at the bottom of the matrix. So at the bottom of the matrix, I have this changing degree of dependency on people, process, and technology. And I actually think that's probably the most underappreciated part of the model. And when it comes to AI, what I've started to really think through is, well, the first question I was trying to figure out is, what does AI really affect when it comes to the people, process, and technology side of the problem space that we deal with? And it's becoming clearer and clearer to me that its greatest effect is not on the technology or on the people, but rather on the processes. And what we're seeing is, and there's a lot of reasons why there's going to be a ton of process disruption. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing is the inability for the organization to update its processes to adapt for all the rapid changes that we're seeing when it comes to AI. I'll give you a couple analogies to help think through this. As Andrew mentioned, I'm in a startup, and as one of the co-founders of the startup, I have tons of ideas, but my team has only a limited capacity to execute on these ideas. So if I just flood them with all my ideas, then they're going to be like, whoa, which idea do you actually want me to address? And I have to go through and prioritize them. But with AI, we have all these new things that are emerging, and the organization doesn't have the capacity to handle that. I'll give you another simple example, one that all of us would be really familiar with, vulnerabilities, or just most organizations don't have the capacity to handle the number of vulnerabilities that we discover, and so we have to prioritize that. Or even, for example, there was a point in time when Bank of America, we were given an unlimited budget for cybersecurity. But even if we could spend an unlimited budget, which wasn't truly the case, the downstream organization wouldn't have the capacity to absorb all the changes that we were trying to make in the security space. We were just saying about MFA. We can make a ton of changes around making our systems much more resilient against these types of attacks, but the downstream organization is not going to have the capacity to absorb all that. And so this is a foundational challenge, a constraint, if you will, that we as organizations will need to figure out, because more and more of these innovations that are coming through AI are going to happen. And we have to think very differently about how we change our business processes to open up the capacity to absorb the amount of change that's going to come at us.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for that, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, that fantastic lead-in, Sunil. Thank you.
Yeah. So Andrew mentioned operational readiness. Can you define that for us? And in particular, in an age where AI evolves faster than perhaps our government frameworks can adapt?
Well, so let me. The way I think through these is just through analogies. And so in terms of operational readiness, the example that I would give with AI and AI agents that we're seeing is, imagine, if you will, you had the opportunity to give every person in your organization the ability to outsource their work to somebody else. Okay. You may end up with lots of legitimate outsourcing avenues. You might end up with North Koreans. You might end up with who knows what, right? Okay. We are essentially enabling that through AI systems today. Okay. Now, hopefully, I don't think it's being sent to North Koreans, but it could be sent to China with, DeepSeek, whatever else it might be. But you are nonetheless, many organizations in the push to adopt AI, they are essentially giving people the power to outsource their work to some other entity. Now you have to really, the question around operational readiness is, are we ready, one, to govern that process? How should we think about governing such a process, this outsourcing function? We already had challenges. We still have challenges when it comes to outsourcing. And now we've increase that by 10 times, essentially, if not more. Okay. Is anybody really operationally ready to handle that using our existing processes? And the answer should be pretty clear. No, we're not. And now the question is, what needs to be rebooted or just rethought through systematically? What underlying assumptions do we need to revisit to make ourselves operationally ready for that type of scenario?
Right. This kind of off script, but it just kind of hit me when you were saying that. We always used to talk about automatically changing rules in a firewall and automatically doing all these things to help, the defender. Oh, this attack's going to come in. We're going to shut down this port. We're going to do all these things. But no one ever wanted to implement it because no one ever wanted to have like a DOS and they didn't trust the result. What's interesting is as I hear you speak, I'm thinking it does seem like people are more open to accepting AI as this cost savings versus kind of like these automated rules or these kind of like behavioral rules, when it came to protecting the network because everyone was worried about making a mistake. But it's like totally flipped right now. It's just an interesting observation.
Well, yeah, I mean, people here, you either better get on the AI train or you're going to be left behind. And I think it's a little bit different than you're right, where it was kind of flipped, where if you made a change and you took the system down for an hour or 2 hours, you were fired. So you're exactly right. But the thing I think that, especially for this audience, Neil, is the fact that you use the term AI and outsourcing, because we don't hear that, but that's exactly what it is. And so I think that's a good, especially for the MSPs out there when they're talking to their clients, that's a good way of relating what AI, in the end really is. You're outsourcing. And so maybe you're talking to somebody that would have had absolutely zero appetite to outsource anything for whatever reason, but they're willing to jump on AI and not realize that you're just doing the same thing. You're just doing it at, laser speed.
Yeah, and when you frame it that way, there's another interesting paradigm shift that also occurs. We generally don't outsource really business critical things. Okay, we choose. I mean, typically we want that more within our direct control. With the ability for us to now outsource a lot of things to AI, there's a fundamental shift in our thinking around what do we truly think of as being critical anymore. Okay, I'll give you a simple example. We, in the past, would think of our source code as intellectual property. We'd want to not actually outsource that, or if we did, to have tighter controls around our source code. But if we can have all these AI coding assistants basically create code fairly dynamically, disregard the quality of the code for a moment. Just imagine 5 years from now, or some time frame passes where we do actually get high quality code from these AI coding assistants. What's the value of intellectual property? The intellectual property value of that source code is no longer there anymore. Okay, and so we would then feel free to outsource that. We wouldn't necessarily feel the burden to outsource to hold that back because it's no longer of as much value as it had before. So the key shift, one of the key fundamental assumptions that we have to really think through is, what do we truly consider of business critical value anymore? Because the things that used to be of high value from a knowledge worker standpoint may no longer be at the same level of value as it was in the past.
So, Neil, you brought up something about, you and I were talking just at lunch about code and how rapidly it can be developed, and you just brought up a good point about IP. Are we going to move into an era where go to market and, just how you are able to, gain market share may be more important than how good your code is, or, it's like how rapidly you can get out and gain market share relative to code, because code is going to be built so ubiquitously. Are we going to have to shift our mindset there? And it's really about who can market better and gain scale.
Well, so actually, there's another fundamental assumption that I've been working to reassess, which is the notion of scale itself. Why do I even, if you think about SaaS providers or vendors in general, part of what we expect from those vendors is for them to scale out a product or build a product that is built for scale for many other customers and such. But there's also this strong trend towards customization. Don't treat me like everyone else. I actually want to. My situation is different than everyone else's. Well, that's essentially what these AI systems are able to also help us do more systematically as well. At some level, the question that I'm actually asking is, where does scale reappear? I don't think scale goes away, but I think our assumptions about scale may go away in the sense, our current assumptions about how companies grow will be changing because it may no longer be selling the exact same product to 100 people, but rather using AI to, if the customer themselves aren't already creating it through their AI system, the value chain will shift somewhere else. And wherever it shifts is where we'll see the new form of scale. Now, I think in our human relationships, the vendor that we work with is no longer someone who may just sell us a product or a widget. It's a vendor or a person or a relationship that we have where we know we can get repeatable results, where we have confidence that they'll continue to deliver what we need as my needs change constantly. And so that may look like someone who operates these AI systems on my behalf and continues to build and adapt to my changing needs. But whatever they build, though, is it going to be something that they may sell to 20 other people? I'm not sure. Because again, if anyone else can create that, then maybe we have a whole bunch of one-offs, which isn't a bad thing either. Having a lot of diversity in our cyber ecosystem makes it much harder for attackers to attack.
Yeah. All right, Phyllis, back to you.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
Pat, you can come up with a framework for each of them, Phyllis.
That's right. There you go. So when you look across the different industries, where do you see the biggest gap between AI capability and organizational capacity?
So the organizational capacity, as I see it, is very limited based on people. You limit it yourself based on your unwillingness to experiment and try new things. So for many organizations, so there's this perspective of if you want to learn. There are no good practices or best practices today. All we have are emerging practices. If you want to understand what these emerging practices are for your own organization, you have to experiment. The main limiting factor that I see is organizations' willingness to experiment. When I was at Bank of America, part of my job as a chief scientist was to experiment, to run experiments. So I had a decent sized budget to run a lot of different experiments. And those experiments had a high failure rate. But that's kind of the whole idea. You learn through this. But many organizations aren't really willing to fail. They consider failure to be a bad thing. Whereas if you're a scientist, failure is part of the learning process. And so many organizations, or when I first went to Bank of America and I asked my different parts of my organization, hey, what's an acceptable failure rate around here? And the answer I typically got was like 0 or 5% or something, pretty small, which makes sense in a risk-averse organization. And then I asked them, hey, I actually negotiated a higher failure rate with my management team. What do you think that was? And they said, I don't know, like 20% maybe. And I said, no, we were debating, okay, between 92 and 96%. And my only point of me mentioning that we're debating it is, it doesn't matter that it was 92 or 96%. It was 90+%. The willingness to fail is how we learn and how we grow our organizational capacity to absorb new technologies and new ways of doing things. And the unwillingness to do that, the unwillingness to fail, the unwillingness to try and experiment with different things is what's going to limit that capacity.
I bet you there were some jaws dropping when you told them that number.
Yeah. Well, I also explained to many people my job was to try to get fired every day. And so part of that involved these experiments and failing a lot.
Do you think that, financial industry has, a little bit higher tolerance of that. I mean, we just saw, major banks say, "Oh, we're going to embrace AI, and in this many years, we're going to see this in the bank, in his banks, like the largest in the world."
Regulated industries are generally more risk adverse. But I think at the same time, I had a special charter, and not everyone within my organization, within the financial services industry, has the kind of charter that I had. We were large enough that they could afford to have someone like me to run that kind of function.
Right.
And I had the privilege of having serving in that role. But I don't think necessarily most organizations will have the risk tolerance to do that.
Right.
Can I just ask Sunil something? Ram asked a great question. Can organizations afford to be laggards, Sunil, when it comes to emerging AI tech, or will they get left behind? And historically, you think about a book like Crossing the Chasm, and you could let the early adopters, get on board, and as long as you were in the majority and embracing tech, you could be quote unquote okay. Is this different?
So let's go back to my intro, which was looking at the cyber defense matrix and the bottom part of that matrix, which was on the people, process, and technology. What I was saying a moment earlier was my original thought around AI was that it's a technology. It displaces the technology. Maybe it displaces the people that we have. And that's generally speaking how we think about the disruption that AI will have on us. But what I'm discovering more and more again is that it's actually much more of a disruption around our process. Mm-hmm. And not just as a disruption, but also as a way to help us understand our existing processes better, to document those processes, to keep them up to date, whatever else it might be. So the reason I bring this up to say, even if you don't actually adopt AI technology, you should think about how your processes, the processes themselves, will leverage or will adapt to the presence of AI in the ecosystem as a whole. Because at some point, you're gonna, there's a whole bunch of problems with shadow AI, right? But you gotta recognize that it's there, and as much as you might want to try to prevent it from affecting, to being used inside your organization, it is going to be used in some way, and so you have to really think about the changing your processes. We see this in education, right? If you tell students, hey, you can't use ChatGPT, but you haven't done anything to change how you teach, your processes for teaching, guess what? It's not you're not going to be able to fight that battle.
I mean, I think that's so true. I mean, I really love how you're making us think harder about the process, because I mean, that was part of the issue before. It's like you always wanted a human in the middle to look to make sure, going back to automating rules. I want to make sure that rule's okay. I want to make sure that this is okay. And so right now, with AI and agentic AI, I mean, the attractiveness is that you're not doing that it's, running at lightning speed. So it is good to look at that process. But in the interest of time, I'm going to pass it over to you, Chris, because we've been talking so much. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, I know. And we want to leave about 20 seconds for Bob at the end. Hey, so Sunil, where do you see the biggest bottlenecks today, in the people, the process, or the technology?
What is the biggest bottleneck? Well, so I was debating. It's not the technology. I was debating in my head whether it's the people or the process. I think I'm going to go back to the process side and say process is the biggest bottleneck. And usually one of those processes inside of larger organizations is third-party risk management and, hey, is this safe to use? And even though it's a perceived bottleneck, at the end of the day, people will just go around those bottlenecks anyway. But typically, it's an organizational process issue, which again, I think from the standpoint of how I look at where AI is outrunning the organizations, it's on that front. We have a lot of organizational processes that just purely are antiquated. And I think we can use AI itself to help us think through what are these new processes we should consider. Actually, just real quickly, like one of the great use cases for AI and for ChatGPT is like disaster recovery scenarios, right? You ask it to come up with various scenarios, and we have to think through how do we handle such a new scenario. The scenario itself is almost irrelevant. It's the way that we actually operate as a team that's the most important part of what you learn through that. And I think even if it's a forcing function, if you use it for that purpose alone, you end up learning a lot about how to revisit your existing processes and improve them.
Yeah, I completely. Go ahead.
So, Chris, I was going to ask, that's a great tee up for Bob. Bob's got to give some insight into that. Bob, have you used it? What have you seen? Has it helped change the way in which you run IR game, or can you give us maybe a 60, 120 second insight?
Thanks for giving me a limit, because that's important. So
I wanted to make sure you had the 30 seconds.
Look, as a COO of an MSP, right, I ran into this a great deal about the operational aspects of it and being able to have people be effective. So there's a whole bunch we can talk about there. But as it relates to IR game, you're absolutely right. I mean, we back in June, we did the first AI cloud compromise for the very reason Sunil was talking about, is these new aspects of these attacks are just elements that people have not seen yet. And the only way you get comfortable around that is to talk about all the things we can't do right this second. You know what I mean? And so I think and that's never going to change. That's it. Every week we have to go back and look and see what we got to add or take away to make sure that we're talking about what's happening today. And so that's an important, one of the reasons that I am so convicted to IR game is because I know this is one of the ways that we can kind of spread this knowledge around, in a democratic sort of a way. So
has it given you those like inspiration though, the way Sunil talked about, like, hey, let's see what it comes up with in this scenario? Like,
yes.
How the different models help?
Well, there's we leverage generative AI on huge chunks of it. Now, the underlying technical aspects of it, we get from subject matter experts, either ourselves or others. But then we let it. That's where you can let generative AI kind of give you inferences on a much broader, more dynamic scale, right? And then you can, as a human at the helm, you take that information and then you put that into a practical storyline. So yes, 100%. It's used. We use it all the time.
Got it. All right.
Yeah, hey, thanks. So next, you often have talked about mapping functions to capabilities in the cyber defense matrix. Where do you think humans today still outperform AI?
Okay, so first is judgment. I think earlier, Phyllis, you were referring to the human in the loop. I think we still make better judgment. We make better judgment calls than AI systems for the most part. But there is a fundamental limit. There's a fundamental limit to what AI systems can do today, and it's actually best codified in a book called "Thinking Fast and Slow." So if you're not familiar with that book, Daniel Kahneman, he's a Nobel Prize winning. He won the Nobel Prize in economics, but he's a psychology doctorate. And he described these two modes of thinking. System one thinking is this fast, intuitive, instinctual, heuristic sort of thinking. And unfortunately, it's very irrational. It's very biased. It's very overconfident. We typically exhibit system one type of thinking in our day-to-day activities and behaviors. System two thinking is this rational, thoughtful, deliberative kind of person. We believe that we're all system two thinkers, and we think that everyone else is a system one thinker. When in reality, we're all really system one thinkers, and we have to engage our system two thinking. Consider like the prefrontal cortex, or like teenagers generally operate in system one, and your system two thinking isn't really fully developed until you're in your 20s, late 20s and such. Anyway, I bring this up as a scenario because AI systems, these large language models, operate largely as a system one thinker. When you have somebody who's a system one thinker, the way you engage them in system two thinking is to say, hey, can you explain your thoughts? Chain your thoughts. Can you put it into the structure? Can you walk through and consider alternatives? There's this way to engage system two thinking in people, and it's very cognitively heavy. Threat modeling is an example of system 2 behavior. Or a quantitative risk quantification is system 2 behavior. Like FAIR, if you're familiar with that, is system 2 behavior. But it is really hard for us to work through. And so I say all that to say these AI systems today, the large language models, are largely system 1 type of tools. It doesn't actually exhibit system 2 behavior. Okay, we're the ones who actually have system 2 cognition capabilities, we as humans. And if we want to really distinguish ourselves in our ability to control these systems properly, it's to overlay our system 2 thinking and structure on top of these system 1 tools that we have in front of us.
No, that makes perfect sense. What advice to leaders would you have or would you give who fear their teams may be falling behind the technology curve, whether that's emotionally or cognitively?
Well, as the general perspective is, one perspective is AI will replace you. The other perspective is you'll be replaced by other people who know how to use these tools more effectively than you. And I would rather push towards the second sort of view and say, again, if we are good system 2 thinkers, we will be able to apply our logic on top of these system 1 tools and be much more effective at what we do. If all you are is a system 1 thinker, you will actually get replaced pretty quickly by another system 1 tool that these AI systems are able to do pretty effectively. So I think in terms of getting people to embrace this technology that's in front of them, it is to learn and experiment and add value, find ways to add value on top of this. And again, just understanding the system 1 versus system 2 concept will help them hopefully see where they can add value as a what the type of brain that we have that is far superior to the type of AI that we have today.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good explanation. And I think it's good for the MSPs here to pass along to their clients. I mean, I would take just what you said and have them watch and listen to just that snippet. All right.
And Mr. read the book. There's there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
And I did put a link in the comments on this video for that one too, as well as a link to your book earlier. So there's no paid for endorsements on this program, everyone, just to let you know. All right, guitar man, it's up to you now.
All right, man. So Neil, I mean, when we think about this on a go forward basis, what do you think the operational metrics are going to look like for defining what a successful AI enabled organization looks like in the next few years?
Okay, so I have a couple. These are. I'm trying to figure out how to distill this into something simple, because the way I'm thinking through this is very elaborate. But one of the metrics is around the process improvements that I mentioned earlier. The challenge with process improvements is that it's actually really hard to calculate the added value from improving a process, which is why it's so underinvested in most organizations. We don't really invest much in process because we don't see the it's just hard. Yeah, we don't see a return. And so there was someone mentioned earlier, I think it was I forget who had the study, around 95% of AI projects fail. Yeah, MIT study that 95% of AI projects fail. So first of all, actually Kahneman talks about this. It's let's call it the planning fallacy. Planning fallacy is we think it's going to take X amount of resources to do some project, and we almost always underestimate that. This is why like 80% of like IT projects fail. Okay, so that 95% that was mentioned, remember, as a baseline, the base rate for failure is already pretty high. It's already like 80%. So now the marginal 15% difference, what might that encompass? Well, what it typically encompasses is these use cases that have no clear ROI attached to it. And so how do you know it was a success if there is no baseline to say, oh, this was a massive improvement. A great example is note taking. I don't think anyone disagrees that note taking is a useful feature. What's the ROI on note taking? I don't know, right? So would that project be a failure, or would it be considered, not a success because we couldn't baseline that? And in some respects, this is kind of what we've seen in those kind of studies. So anyway, as far as a metric is concerned, ROI is kind of hard to capture. The process improvements are hard to capture. So what I would say is, instead of just talking about the value from a change, I would rather just count the changes and say, how often are we actually changing and updating these processes? Because the more that we can introduce change into our environment, the faster or the more that the organization is dynamic and able to adapt to change over time. If you can't change your processes very quickly, you've become you've calcified your organization in such a way that it can't adapt to new changes coming up. We see this also with software. If software is being constantly updated on a regular basis and a new vulnerability emerges, I have a higher confidence that software bug or vulnerability will be fixed quickly. If that software has not been touched in ages, think COBOL, think whatever, you're gonna pay a premium, or you're gonna have a lot of challenges in being able to fix that software. You may not expect a software fix for a long time just because things have calcified around that. So anyway, the number of changes is one of the metrics I would look for when it comes to how AI is affecting an organization. The more changes that you've introduced, I think the more changes that the organization can absorb, going back to the earlier comment, the more resilient your organization is to future changes.
Yeah.
So Neil, is there any is it pets and cattle? Is there any utility of that analogy to this as you talk about it? And that was such a great, maybe can it give you a quick anecdote of that presentation and that construct that you built?
So what you're hearkening back to is something that I created called the DIE triad, and that stands for distributed, immutable, ephemeral, and it spells DIE for a reason. But it harkens back to an earlier comment I made around scale and things being where something is not business critical. We tend to have a lot of pets in our environment, and pets are very business critical assets. Those are your legacy systems. What we want to do instead is build towards things like cattle. And to build towards things like cattle, you want them to be distributed, immutable, and ephemeral, or you want them to really kind of go away after the transactional use. To take this to an extreme with AI, I'm building software right now using AI coding assistants that have a one-time use, okay? Maybe twice, or it doesn't really need scale beyond, I'm just going to use it for this one thing, and I just want to have it do it for, typically we write code and scripts when we know that we're going to do this function over and over and over again, but sometimes maybe I just don't even want to do it at all. I just want to tell an AI system to go do it for me and write code for it so I can just go run it. And after I'm done, I throw away the code. Do I really care if that code is secure? Okay.
Or if that code gets vulnerable.
Who cares? Right, exactly. And so that's the principle of DIE at work. But it also is reflecting, again, if my systems and organization can constantly adapt to those kind of changes, then it allows me to not have to worry so much about having to secure everything, because by the time an attacker finds a vulnerability, the system itself may have completely changed underneath them.
It's such a great model, and for those out there, just Google Sunil Yu, the DIE triad. Go look on YouTube, see if you can find it. If not, pay a lot of money for it.
Right. If you can't find it, you're an absolute failure.
But it's okay at 92%.
Right. Yeah, we have given everybody a green car to go and fail in the high 90s now. Should be proud of that.
All right. Moving on. So Neil, when we're looking at AI adoption, right? Are there, we got to come back to the risk frameworks that are involved in operating organizations too, right? So, what do you feel like are as risk frameworks like in a NIST and ISO are starting to evolve around this? Do you think they're evolving fast enough to try and cover this human gap that we're facing?
So most of these frameworks are not specific enough to really address some of the emerging things that we're discovering about the use of these tools. So I think in some respects, but that's to be expected. I don't know. I mean, typically, in many cases, those sort of things will lag, and we only discover, oh, we should have codified this ahead of time. There are some significant concerns that emerge, that have already emerged, for which we're starting to put in some guidance or some guardrails around this. And at least it's issues like so. If you go look at the White House's AI action plan, there's a lot of concerns that they brought up. But one of the ones that kind of deserves its own special attention is the use of AI to create biological
weapons, warfare.
Yeah, it's more than just weapons. I think it's like just even biological creations and anyway, to govern that and say, hey, you know what, this can go wrong really fast, really quickly. And so before it becomes more and more widespread, we need to put some guardrails around this specific type of use case. And I think that's where we would see a little bit of jumping ahead, which is great, right? When things could be catastrophically be bad for everyone around us. So those sort of norms of behavior, I think, are good to establish up front. But we have a whole bunch of other things that are happening for which we don't really know if norms are necessary. And the current administration is not inclined to hold back on have people hold back on experimenting outside of those potentially really disastrous scenarios. And so it's unclear what new guardrails we need and what type of scenarios we need to account for. We've already seen some of these happen, of course, like with the teenagers and ChatGPT coaxing them to commit suicide. But those are things that we already knew would happen or could happen. And the foundation model companies are now just really catching up. But we don't need AI to cause a whole bunch of people to be depressed and commit suicide. Social media has already done that for us.
Yeah, it's true statement, unfortunately. Yeah. So, I mean, it's been a while since you've been on the cyber call, Sunil. So can you tell us what you've been seeing when you have conversations and implementations with things like executives and security leaders? What's the general conversations been like as it relates to AI?
Okay, well,
yeah, maybe just start the tone with Gnostic, like for in the lab. Let's just use the last, 2+ minutes here, Sunil. Talk Gnostic. What are you seeing? It's a great question, Bob.
So real quickly, without plugging what Gnostic is doing too much, I mentioned the suicide example earlier. What the issue here was, you had teenagers who were asking about suicide, but ChatGPT, what we believe as society believes is, hey, if you're a child, you shouldn't. These AI tools shouldn't answer that question. But if you're an adult or a counselor, maybe you should. What that is a distinction between different personas and the need to know for different personas. We're applying that same concept to an enterprise. If you're in HR, it's okay to learn about layoffs. If you're in corp dev, it's okay to learn about M&A. But if you're not in those roles or those personas, then the AI system, regardless of what access you have, should be able to say, hey, you know what, we think I can't answer that for you, right? Okay, so that's kind of what we do. And this helps address a lot of the oversharing problems that we see in Copilot and other tools like that. But generally speaking, Andrew, to your question, I think the vast majority of the people I've talked to are really still struggling to understand how to govern AI in this broader sense that you can imagine. And so I've equipped them with a number of mental models and tools, some of which I'll be sharing tomorrow at Cyber Bay, to really help them answer the question for their given circumstance, because there is no single answer to that question. It really is very contextual to your current situation. But what I'm giving folks are tools for thinking. I don't have answers, because the answers can be different for different people. But if I equip people with the tools for thinking, and the cyber defense matrix is one of those kind of tools, then I think it teaches them how to fish so that they can go and figure out this in their own environment.
Yeah, great stuff, Sunil. So gosh, that hour flew.
It did fly.
We way fast. I put in there, Sunil, that you're going to be doing one of the keynotes at Write a Boom. I'm excited about that. Always good to have you back. You were our inaugural keynote speaker back in 2022. And when you kind of first burst onto the scene with us and the cyber defense matrix. So, yeah, Eric, I appreciate your comments. I think, bringing on Sunil was awesome. And everybody out there, thank you so much for your support and comments, because that really helps things. Phil, it's awesome having you. Bob, Chris, wishing you all a fantastic week, and be safe out there, and look forward to seeing you next Monday. Take care, everybody.